Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining our weekly podcast. I'm Shelley Cohan, and I am so thrilled and excited to welcome back Janice Wang, CEO of Alvanon. Welcome, Janice.
So nice to be here, Shelley.
I love...
As we were talking earlier, this is my first podcast.
It's very exciting that you picked Retail Unwrapped to be your first podcast, but also we've done a lot of webinars together, and I love the brand and the company, which we'll get to in a second, Alvanon. So today we're going to talk about a couple different things, but one is AI across the supply chain. Mm-hmm. And I know you believe that brands have to invest in this foundational technologies today because that's how you can really leverage AI for trend prediction, product development, and consumers' trust for tomorrow. So your whole philosophy is don't wait for AI to arrive, which I think is great. And I think it needs to be a wake-up call for our industry. The other thing that we're going to talk about is TechFest 2025. I'm very excited. I love the fact that it's free access for all. So hopefully listeners here will get advanced tips on how they can make the biggest advantages from the TechFest. So let's start first. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Alvanon, the company, and kind of where you came from.
Well, in industry, right, Alvanon got its name from Thomas Alva Edison. And when my father founded this company, he actually founded it as a tech company. However, we're really known for these lovely forms that we have behind us, and we're known as a mannequin company. Now, the reason is that we're very pragmatic people. We were born in 2001, right after the tech bust, per se, the first ever one, dot-com boom and bust. And, there's a lot of pragmatism involved. My father's original idea really was to be able to allow people to shop online and buy the things that they really wanted to buy and have them fit when you bought them. And you can imagine this was in like his first thought process for this was like in the late 1990s. So obviously we really didn't have any of the tools per se. And so his whole very long-term philosophy was that this had to happen at some point, but there were so many different things that needed to change in order to get there that one had to figure out what was the easiest way in. And actually that became figuring out what the sizes were and how demographics are different in different locations. Be able to set up a standard inside a supply chain before the brand itself, and then hopefully at one point the technology would catch up and the use of technology would catch up in the industry. Because obviously about 25 years ago, and I can't believe next year we're 25, I really never thought that we were going to be able to do this like at this point. But, one of the things that happened was you can only move as fast as the people who are using these things go along with. This is very different today now with AI, because we've never ever seen a situation where things are changing as fast as they are. And I think, in previous iterations, in the past 25 years, we've seen a lot of brands, right? In previous iterations, you still had time. You still were able to say, okay, next season I'll do this, and I have enough time to fix this, and go forward. But I think that is a little bit over now because everybody's moving at warp speed.
It's so true. The whole industry is moving very fast, and what's interesting is when you think about just something as simple as sizing, and you look at the U.S. demographic, mm-hmm. Our multi-general consumers here pose a lot of different challenges. And then when you look at globally, all the different, parameters that have to go into that, there's really no such thing as like common sizing. Standardized sizing doesn't really exist. But what I find really interesting about Alvanon is you really kind of address two things. You address a industry issue problem, but you're also addressing a huge consumer problem. So tell us a little bit about that crossover?
So, when we actually first thought about this, when my father's original idea was you had to be able to get the image from the consumer and match them to one of the sizes that actually the brand actually had standardized, right? So the first thing we did, and we realized that there's preference involved in everything. So if you strip it all away, the most important thing is to be able to match the consumer's shape onto the size that you actually have standard. And then you can see where the differences are. And then as a consumer, you can figure out, well, okay, maybe I'll buy that a little bit looser, or maybe I won't, right? Or maybe I like them tight and I just want to have like a bandeau dress. So fine, you expect these kinds of things, but actually at that point you have to question, how am I getting these images of the person? How do I identify who my consumer is, right? And then how do I match that from that consumer part to the industrial part? Now, in doing so, there's a lot of different factors, a lot of different technologies. And that's why actually in the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen a lot of size finders come out. And to a certain extent, those have become commoditized, right? People hate using them. Have you met anybody, any woman who actually likes this? I don't know what my bust measurement is. And I work in this. I still don't know what it is, right? I don't know what my waist and where am I measuring my waist from. There was a lot of factors that why some of these size finders posed challenges to the consumer themselves. But so what we've actually figured out is with this advent of AI, that there are going to be many more tools that you can actually recognize the shape of a person very easily and be able to map that. Now, however, the biggest issue is that as a brand or as a site that sells multiple brands, you have to have all of those standards of each of those sizes for each of those brands so that you can match it against that. And so that's kind of the part that, us having been in for 25 years in the industry, being everybody's standards, and actually, to a certain extent, helping the technical and production people become the disciplinarian for that. It required somebody like us to actually be able to help empower that process. So now at certain brands, what we have is very strong, efficiency and technical expertise and a kind of disciplined workflow. But there's a multitude of brands who don't have that as well, by the way. So
yeah, I'm sure there's a lot out there that don't have that.
Yes, and that actually is just a function of kind of industry movement and kind of companies and the way that they change. But then what now we also have is new technology, right, from the AI side, that actually allows us to make those matching possible. And if we think about that for an efficiency position, it actually changes a lot of inventory hold problems. So the biggest issue is I would tell you that in most companies, the production people versus the design people versus the merchants who buy the merchandise, there's a store manager, all of these things, they're so siloed, right? So and the executive sits on top of them, they don't probably see all of the tiny, tiny granular problems that happen on a day-to-day basis. And there's a lot of unintentional consequences, right? So the intention is that we want, everybody wants to make the perfect product for the perfect consumer.
Of course.
No such thing as perfect consumer, no such thing as perfect product, right? Especially not at the $29.99 range.
Right.
We're not talking about couture here. We're talking about, lots of inventory out there that doesn't get used because there's the multitude of issues that are surrounding this. But I think with what we've seen in the past 2 years, now we can use a lot of the tools that are out there in AI to be able to analyze various parts of the whole demand and supply chain. And this will allow us to kind of become much more efficient, right, as an industry.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, so there's the excess supply that's at the end of a season, and
yes,
that's not good for our environment, it's not good for the companies.
Yes.
And then you also have, a lot of the online businesses that are really about selling online fashion, and we know that online fashion has a tremendously high rate of return.
Yes.
And the number one reason is sizing.
Yes.
So if you are able to fix those two things, you could make a really dynamic impact on the industry as a whole and sustainability.
Yes, and well, that's the hope, right? I mean, that was the original premise. We had that the fact that we had to wait, we're waiting 25 years to do this, right? Is, well, thank goodness, and we thank all of our clients for actually supporting the view, long-term view that we've actually had, but it is actually good business sense. This is about top line and bottom line. And actually, for the longest time, brands have chased only top line, but you can't anymore.
It's impossible. So let me ask you a question. So
Sure.
we talked a little bit about, the brands and they're having this, proper sizing and using AI and all that. A lot of companies are trying to forecast trends for next
Yes.
season, 2 years from now. So how does your technology help with trend forecasting?
So trend forecasting, right, look, 80% of most of what you make is actually core product. 20% is your fashion product, right? Trend forecasting is going to work on that 20%. One of the key things is, and what we actually work on, is actually figuring out, hey, there's this consumer demographic that you actually say is your loyal consumer. How do you take all of that information and actually be able to use different systems and parse that information that actually will allow you to buy the right amount for the next season, right? And actually, what is your sizing hold, right? If anybody's still using that kind of 1, 2, 2, 1, whatever matrix that they are using, let's first figure out what is that 2 to begin with in your medium, right? Because your medium, if it was at one point a size 8 or a 10, but you're actually selling in places where the medium is more like a 14, then what is this matrix look like? And I think sometimes people assume that this is being looked at and analyzed, right, by all of the people in the company. But I think when you get down to that granular level and you start to actually look at what is the matrix that they have bought, is it a historical matrix or how does it change? And actually, I think a lot of people don't recognize that if you change that matrix a little bit, there is a vast kind of cascade of problems that happens at the production level as well, right? So if, for instance, I'm about to actually make more so that my SKU actually looks like 1, 2, 2, 3, being in an extra large, the costing on your garment is going to change.
Right.
So there are all these cascading problems that I think that I think the people working at the working level and using it at that level can raise flags going, hey, things are going to change. But when it comes up to it and you're actually at this level, when you're actually looking at consolidated information and financial information, you don't really see those nuances anymore. But actually the granularity matters. Now, if you were to layer, and there are many people working on this problem, and it's not just us. We require all the collaborators in each one of these sectors to actually make for a better efficient kind of demand chain, supply chain, right? So those are the things that you want to kind of look at as a company to say, okay, trend forecasting part, let's see what, the trends may well be for that 20%. Do we change the size matrix there? Are these trends more suited towards what kinds of bodies, right? And how do we buy there? Then how do we actually adopt that to kind of product development? Do these things change? They do not change. This is your standard, right? It just stays the same. But now you can actually baseline off of that and say, in this sector, I'm going to have more of this. In this sector, I'm going to have less of this. And so it allows for a more dynamic shift of kind of the inventory hold that you're holding for that, and that translates directly into bottom line, right?
That's amazing. So the other thing that you're a big proponent of is being able to use what you call these digital foundations. So
Yes.
understanding you have size sets and product libraries and data standards. Can you talk a little bit about what that means today and maybe how retailers can really use that to unleash the power of AI?
Right. So size sets, in any executive's view, it's the domain of the technical design department or the production department. It haven't looked at it from a inventory hold standpoint and actually in a financial standpoint of actually how that works, right? So that's one thing that can be immediate. It's actually an immediate act to the bottom line. So that's one thing. And this is circular to a certain extent. You start doing this, and then you start standardizing. So you start standardizing then a pattern library on top of these, so that then you can actually say, when this new trend comes in and it says, I have to have a bigger drop shoulder, right? I'm not changing this base pattern of the armhole. I'm just dropping the shoulder. So I don't think, and you can use a lot of kind of iterative generation AI to actually look at that, to say, okay, there's this new trend and it's hot pink. Let me visualize what that looks like. Let me put that back onto my foundational kind of pattern library, foundational bodies. You're actually speeding up the product development, and with some accuracies, without some accuracies, but at least people can picture what they're about to make. Right? So then, therefore, that product development cycle will kind of scrunch. You scrunch that time is money, right?
Absolutely.
If, for instance, they were holding fabric on the other side for you and just dyeing immediately, then you actually have even more of a tight crunch. So you're actually making much closer to the market than the 18 months out that we're holding today. So, that was a very long-winded answer for actually what the question that...
No, it was great. So let me ask, so bestsellers, let's talk about bestsellers for a second. So every company knows its bestsellers. They go through, they can give you, here are the 50 bestsellers in the past 10 years, whatever. But can we now really look at why, from a design, technical perspective, why these are bestsellers? Can you find commonalities about the consumer base?
So a lot of this has to do with how well they've got that information that they've got, is how well they mine kind of the consumer loyalty side, right? Consumer loyalty for the longest time has actually just been about what you bought before and what price point you bought for and your email address. There's a gold mine of stuff in there, right, that you could use to actually be able to give the right things to the right people. And actually you see there's a few different kind of products out there these days and that actually can help that streamline a lot of that kind of consumer insight.
That's great.
And so if you layer on a very disciplined baseline, you can actually see the difference between them. And then you analyze the delta, right? So, I mean, part of this is, it sounds like, it sounds really common sense. Actually, I would say that a lot of people would say, wait, are we not doing that already? And what you find is that because the data has been so unstructured for so long.
That's right.
The problem is that but 2 years ago, you couldn't structure that data. But today, right, we can use tools to restructure that data. And I'm sure that kind of the business analysts inside these big companies are actually looking at that and saying, okay, how do we use AI to restructure some of this data? We put them in buckets. And I'll give you the most dumb kind of example of anything, is that 25 years of our photo library database, right?
Excellent, yes.
In 20,000 places, which we don't even know where the stuff is. And meaning of our photos of kind of, people who used to work with us, factory photos, what linen we used to use, all of this kind of unstructured data. So we're like, oh, but next year we're turning 25. Really, maybe actually we really have to actually go and thank all the wonderful people who have been with us for so long. So we're like, oh, but don't know where all the photos are. Got to go find all the photos. Immediately, right, you can use a very quick way of actually saying, let's shove them all into one place, run an AI on top of them. Could see me and Jason and John from when, like, in 2003. And yes, of course, we look exactly the same.
Of course.
Of course. But yet it can identify us in a picture, right? And so then you've actually got, and it literally can actually pick out all the people who used to work, once we tagged it, who those people were, immediately, boom, you have a bunch of structured data that you can use for whatever use it is. But this is about cultural mindset, right? Everybody in the company itself, and I think that, we have been significantly lucky that everybody who works with us and inside our company has this culture of, let's look at what tools are available, recognize they are tools, break things. Break things that we used to think were kind of break workflow processes that we used to actually have and say, how can we make things faster? How can we give ourselves 2 hours back of our day, right, to do important things like go hang out with our kids? Who doesn't want that? And I think that's the part that gets overwhelming sometimes if you're somebody who works in the workflow process, is that actually all I want is my 2 hours back. But if you tell me that I've got to learn something new or do something new, then it changes the things that I used to do. A little bit of a scary place. But now with all of the tools that AI provides, mindset has to change to say that actually, I don't have to be scared of this stuff anymore. It's going to make me happier because I can go do the things that I want to do. So
I love that, Janice. I love that philosophy. That's great. And, since Alvanon was born, you've always been tech and data driven from day one. And so that kind of drives through. So I think it's great. One big key takeaway that I take from everything that you just said is retailers and brands have been collecting all this data for the past 15, 20 years.
Yes.
A lot of them don't know what to do with all the data, but now you can unleash the power of that data in a different way. You can go back to the archives or the searchable libraries and really make a tremendous impact on the future.
Yes. But I think all of this is about being the bridge, right?
Right.
The bridge mentality that has to be there is that, yes, we can get this done. And, that's kind of how we've always thought about it, is because there's always been look, silos are not new things, right? They exist so that we can do our work effectively. But now we've got to bring all of the silos together and actually be able to bridge all of these gaps. And that requires for everybody to have a different type of mindset going forward. And I think that AI actually helps us do that as long as we are not scared. And what I find is that a lot of companies haven't really looked into the processes to see how can AI actually be applied in a very pragmatic manner, right? That gives you that 2 hours back. And from our point of view, we know kind of where which brands are actually going to be able to cross this divide and which ones aren't, because they also have kind of discipline on the bottom. So it's really a mix of kind of discipline plus tools, discipline plus mindset. And I think that's kind of where our whole ethos have always stemmed from. So
That's great. I love it. So before we leave, though, we have to talk about your fantastic 3D Tech Fest, because I think you've been running this for 5 years.
Yes.
And it's coming up very soon, October
Yes.
9th. And so let's talk a little bit about that. I love the fact that you have opened it up for all. And you say that in order to improve our industry, we have to be open about what we're doing, right?
Yes. So first things is that we took away the 3D part of Tech Fest. So this year is going to be Tech Fest, because actually I think people got fixated on this idea that that 3D is a system that we have to use and we have to focus on, and actually there's pattern making on top of that, and that's actually a whole new subset of whatever we need to learn. It never actually was that way, but it was just kind of the feeling that actually came along with it. And so when this year, what we're going to focus on is all the new technologies that are available that actually help you become much more efficient. So we're going to start with the design process. And one of my great friends is going to, from Karl Lagerfeld, is going to actually, Hun is going to kind of actually draw a couple of things and see how he uses that to actually, how he uses AI to create kind of new ideas and also be able to show them to merchandising, right? And actually, so that the concept can actually become reality very quickly, and they can say, oh, this is really what I'd like. Then we have people who are working with the technologies in the factory. How do you actually use AI inside a factory session to actually take all of the information that's coming in, fill out all of those kind of tech packs that work properly, and then actually move that onto a factory floor, and how those kind of joins will actually happen. We've got some other people who are going to talk about, how do we actually culturally change people who are a little bit scared of all of this. But mostly, and also demand forecasting. So demand forecasting is a huge thing that you can use AI for. And so there's technologies that you can use for there. And actually, by the way, we are technology agnostic. So it doesn't matter what you use. This is about, whatever works for you, great, but there are a lot of systems out there and there's a lot of help out there. So we're just going to introduce those concepts into part of that, and also how do those unintended consequences cascade into other people's workflows. So, and we always wanted this to be open and free. And because, listen, I think I've said this multiple years back on TechFest, is that we always send people of certain levels in the company to go to conferences. And that's awesome, but YouTube exists, right? So you can learn anything, but it needs to be a little bit curated, and we all kind of should use this as a talking point inside companies. Say, okay, so we've had this kind of learning event that actually happens for 3.5 hours or 4 hours. What do we take from this, and how do we apply it? Because how does an application help the company afterwards?
Yeah, and the other thing, Janice, I'm sure you recognize you're doing this, but by giving access to people that may not be at the top but are in the middle levels or entry levels, you are like giving these young executives a peer into how they can lead their future in their companies.
Yes, and it's also, young executives, and also, people who are even trainees, or even, we've had people, where a lot of students join, and I love it when students join, because I think they need to see the realities sometimes of industry. And for all the educators who are out there, we are very, very, very happy that everybody uses this inside classes. And so, part of our mission has been to improve the industry in whichever way that we can, empower the people who are inside this industry. And we just hope that this is why we teach a lot, and we make sure that students actually know a lot of things, because we have to provide some hope for this next generation that comes in here and says, no, AI is going to do everything. No, AI is not going to do everything. It's going to do what you tell it to do, right? And so let's please tell them things that actually are useful and helpful.
I love that.
Yeah.
And Janice, I have to say, for you and Jason, a big heartfelt thank you for all of your support with students in university studies. I know at Syracuse University, they obviously use Alvanon. At Fashion Institute of Technology, it's a staple in many, many of our courses. And it's so funny, I had a student come up to me, I think it was last semester, and said, oh, professor, I want to do my project on inclusive sizing, and there's this great company. And I'm like, yeah. So, really thank you for your contributions to the future generations.
Well, I really thank them for entering industry, actually, because we really need more makers, and we really need engineers and people who are thoughtful and about what's to come, right? So,
absolutely. So, is there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
I'd like to say that not to be scared of new technology and things that are coming down, because it's there to make us better. And please, if you actually really think about it, have some discipline in the baseline. and make sure that actually, your fundamentals are in place as brands and as companies, because once you have those in place, building stuff on top of it is much easier. So wherever you can do that, and this may be just in like list writing, wherever you are in this supply chain, in this demand chain, really examining those things and moving forward is, the way to build.
Love it. Thank you, Janice. And I'm sure when we're in our podcast, in the write-up, we'll put a link to how people can register for TechFest 2025, because I would love for all of our listeners to participate in that this year.
Yes, it would be wonderful. Thank you so much for today, Shelley. See you
Thank you,
soon.
Janice.